My name is Kelly, and I am an alcoholic. And now I'm incredibly nervous because Chuck talked me way up. But anyway, I am grateful to be here. And if you came here to hear Steve's story tonight, I'm sorry. This is my home group. Well, first of all, I do have a sobriety date, and my sobriety date is May 3rd of 2007. And I have a home group, and this is it. And I love this home group. And like Chuck said, I've been a part of this home group since I got sober. I also have a sponsor, and she has a sponsor, and I'm extremely, extremely grateful for that because I don't know where I'd be without her today. So I'm here to tell you what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now, and I will do that to the best of my ability. Before I got up here, Chuck asked me to please refrain from dropping the F-bomb, so I was like, okay, I guess I can do that. So I will do my best. I was, if you know me, that's funny. So I was born in Bass, which is not far from here, born and raised to two parents who are still together today, which I think is truly a blessing. I have an older brother. He's 2 years older than me, and we never really got along. I grew up in a neighborhood full of guys, so like growing up, what I did was hang out with the guys. I played war outside with the guys. I had camo on, camo paint, and a stick gun like the rest of them, and I fit in with that. It was pretty cool. That's just what we did. And during the summer, we played basketball until it got too dark, and then we threw rocks at bats, laying on our back in the driveway. And that was a good time. That's probably the most excitement that I found in Bass, North Carolina. So, and if you know Bass, you know what I'm talking about. I grew up in a family that loved to drink, loved to party. They had a great time. My mom and dad, as far back as I can remember, drank, and they drank heavy. We were always, every weekend, we were at the party lady's house or the party came to our house, always. And for a long time, I really loved that environment. I remember very, very young sitting on the tailgate of my daddy's truck at a party, and I loved it. My dad was drinking. All the other kids were jumping on a trampoline way off in the woods, but I was hanging with my dad. I loved the loud music. I loved the bonfires. I loved that environment, and I loved when my parents got drunk because then I could do what I wanted to. I could run wild. So I really, really loved that, and I craved that environment most of my life up to Alcoholics Anonymous. I sought out people like that throughout my entire drinking career, people who drank like my mama and my daddy did. There came a time eventually in my youth when I began to resent my parents drinking. I began to resent what it did to them, and I hated it when they drank. And I'm not really sure why that is, but I just hated that. So anyway, my earliest drink, or my first drink ever, was when I was teeny weeny, and my parents had a party at their house, and there was red Solo cups everywhere, and I was always going 15,000 miles an hour, like I still am today. I was always real wired and real enthusiastic as a little girl. And so I just remember running laps through the kitchen and through the living room and through my mom and daddy's room, and I came in the living room and I picked up a red Solo cup and took a big drink, and it was booze of some sort. I have no idea. And I remember thinking, how do they drink this? Like I was a Kool-Aid girl. And but that was my first drink ever. Wasn't significant. I don't remember anything other than that. It wasn't earth-shattering event. Going through school, I didn't do very well in school. I always talked too much and got in trouble a lot in school. My report cards and progress reports always were unsatisfactory, talks too much, doesn't pay attention. I was a fiddler, always playing with something, and I didn't do really well in school. Academically, I did not do very well at all. I never did my homework. I just wasn't a good student. But I had fun at school, though. Okay. Of course I had fun. But at any rate, there came a time when I became very, very depressed in my childhood, and I became restless, irritable, and discontent. And I know that that's a common theme throughout Alcoholics Anonymous, is that feeling of not feeling a part of, feeling disconnected, that restless, irritable, and discontented feeling. And I had that. I had that way back. I remember having that as a very little girl. I remember, not fitting in at school very well. We grew up in a trailer park, and so I didn't have nice clothes, nice cool shoes. When school started every year, a lot of times I had the same stuff I had last year. And, growing up, going through school, that's just not cool. So I got picked on a lot for that. And I got picked on a lot because I got dropped off. I had to ride the bus. My parents have always been I've come from a very working class family, so I had to ride the bus. My parents worked. My dad works 2 jobs now, and my mom's always held a full-time job. So I had to ride the bus, and I got picked on because I got dropped off at the head of the trailer park. Always got picked on for that. So anyway, I didn't really play well with others. At school, I got picked on a lot, like I said. And so there came a time when I really hated to go to school. I just hated it. And I used to say, if it were just me and the teacher in class, I'd probably do pretty well. It's all these other people. That's my problem. All these other people in class. So I hated that. And like I said, my brother and I weren't really close. So, you would think it'd be nice to have an older brother to go to school with, because certainly he would stick up for his little sister, but that was not the case. It was not cool hanging out with my brother in school. Like, I wasn't even allowed to be like 10 feet near him. So at any rate, going through school, like I said, I became very restless, irritable, and discontented, very isolated, very depressed. And by the time I was 13 years old, I had dabbled in some other substances. Other substances are a major part of my story. I've never had a legal alcoholic beverage. So, it's pretty difficult to drink around the clock unless I stole it constantly. So I did any and everything else that I could in addition to alcohol. Anything to give me the effect produced by alcohol was perfectly okay with me. And I'm not going to talk about specifics out of respect for Alcoholics Anonymous. At any rate, so by the time I was 13, like I said, I had dabbled in other things, and I was very close to 2 people. I had 2 friends. That was really it at that point. And one of the friends had an older sister. Lindsay had an older sister, and so one weekend we had decided that we're going to try this alcohol thing. We're going to try this stuff. And so our older sister provided the liquor. Or I don't even know what it was, to be honest with you. I know it wasn't beer, but it was some kind of liquor, and provided that, and then left for the weekend. And so we had the house to ourselves because her parents thought that her sister was watching us. And let me tell you, that night something magical happened to me. I have no idea what I drank, but I know that after I reached a certain point, I had reached that moment of everything was okay. I was right with the world was right with me. I felt connected, I felt whole, I felt like I belonged, and I had a fabulous time that night. I went into a blackout about halfway through the night. When I came to, they had pulled me onto the waterbed and had William, another friend of ours, laying on the bed with me. I came to, I vomited all over him, all over the waterbed, all over the floor, all over her clothes. I threw up everywhere and spent the rest of the night in the bathroom. So, and what's funny is that the next morning when I woke up, the thought never crossed my mind, I'm not going to do that again. All I could think about was I cannot wait to do that again. That was awesome, It was just a matter of like, how could I do this and not get so sick? That's all I was really concerned with. And I could deal with that. If I got that sick every time, I'd be all right with it. Because the effect I got that night was worth it. So I went through school. By this time, I guess I was like in 8th or 9th grade. I don't know. But so I had been in the band for 3 years, and that was like my thing. I didn't do well academically, but I rocked at the band. So I did that. I played the flute. I wasn't very good the first 3 years that I played, but before I went into high school, I remember my band teacher asked me, did I still want to continue playing the flute when I got into high school? And I was like, heck yeah, man, because I loved it. I thought I was awesome. He didn't, but I thought I was awesome. So I was like, yeah, I really do. And I really wanted to be in the marching band at this time. The marching band was like the thing to do if you went to Union Pines High School. We had an incredible marching band the year before I went into high school. So that was the thing to do. And he was like, well, Kelly, I was kind of thinking that maybe you would do better at the color guard. And I was really insulted by that because the color guard twirls flags. They don't play instruments. That's all they do, And so I was really insulted when he made that comment. And I insisted on playing the flute. And that summer, I practiced all summer. I tried out and I made the marching band. By the end of my junior year, I had won 3 outstanding woodwind awards. I was the woodwind captain in the marching band. I was first chair all district, first chair all county, first chair in the wind ensemble, and I also played the piccolo. So what that shows, and the reason I tell that story, is because in our big book it talks about how the alcoholic's will is incredibly, incredibly strong in most other aspects in their life, except when dealing with alcohol. And that was absolutely true for me. He told me I couldn't, I knew that I could, and I rocked it. So that was what I had going for me in school. I had scholarships lined up for me for when I graduated. And alcohol stripped that away from me. By this time, I was drinking every chance that I got because I told you my parents drank, every weekend. So there was always a case of beer in the refrigerator and always a carton of cigarettes beside the refrigerator. So I would steal a pack of cigarettes and steal their beer, and I'd go sit in my closet and drink the smoke out the window, if I couldn't get together with friends. And typically what I did, and if you're young, you understand this, I would tell my mom that I was going to spend a night with so-and-so, and then she would tell her mother that she was spending the night with me, and both of us would end up by a bonfire later that night in the middle of the woods at someone else's home, drinking. And I did this all the time. There came a point when I started skipping school. I started jumping out of my back window, pushing the screen out, jumping on the AC unit, cutting through the yard, and was out all night, and I'd come home by 6:30 so that my mom could get me up and get ready for school. And this was pretty regular. I started skipping school so that I could drink. I'd get 2 bottles of Robitussin and drink those before I went to school, just so that I could have the same effect that I got when I drank. Like I said, I did what I had to do to get that feeling, of feeling whole and a part of, to not feel so restless, irritable, and discontented. By the time I was 15 or 16 years old, I had been institutionalized twice for depression and for suicidal tendencies and other things. I was diagnosed, I can't even tell you, but I was diagnosed a whole lot of stuff. And I was on a whole lot of prescription medication for those diagnoses. And I loved it because most of those medications had the martini bottle with a line through it, and it intensified the effect produced by alcohol. And I loved it. So I didn't mind taking the medicine. It did for me what I could not do for myself. And what the miracle of that is that since I've been sober, I have not had to take any prescription medication, nor have I been institutionalized. Alcoholics Anonymous is my medicine, and I found out that my diagnosis is alcoholism. So anyway, so like I said, by the time I was 16, I had been institutionalized twice. My parents were convinced that there was something very wrong with me. I was too, and I just didn't know what it was. By this time, I was taking really anything that I could get. My parents were onto my case. My mom started finding out that I was skipping school, and I started getting more trouble with her at home. My brother and I really, he was kind of doing his own thing, so he wasn't much to go home and tell on me because he knew that I had a whole bunch of stuff stacked up on him. And I like to tell this story too. I was asked to prom, high school prom, by a senior who I was madly in love with at the time. And, that night, I'll never forget that. My mom was so excited because I was not like prom material. I just wasn't someone you took to prom. And so my mom was really excited. And I remember, we went out and got the dress, and she did my hair and helped me get all beautiful that night. And he came and picked me up, and I had the boutonniere for him and all that. And we took all kinds of beautiful pictures and stuff. And it was kind of like this really exciting thing. I wasn't really thrilled about it. I was more excited. I had a dress packed in another bag, a party dress that I was going to slip into after I left, so that I could, do what I needed to do. I was excited and looking forward to the party after the party. My mom had given me a curfew for midnight, and I was like, I can do that. So we went to prom, and about 20 minutes into prom, I took the shoes off that my mom had bought me when we walked in, and I sat in a chair and pouted. I never got up and took pictures. I never got up and danced, but I begged him to take me away from there to one of our friends' houses so that I could get absolutely wasted. And I did that. He took me, and before we got there, I started getting giddy and excited, and he looked at me with disgust and said, "Look at you, you're already getting giddy." Like that was a bad thing. I'm like, yeah, I am. Thank you very much. And like it was a bad thing. And when we got there, I started drinking, and I don't remember half the night. I went into a blackout. I came to later that night. My head was hitting the floorboard of his Jeep, and we were sitting in my driveway, and he poured me into the driveway and left me in disgust. Absolute disgust. And I came to the next morning in my bedroom in the same dress that I had gone to sleep in the night before, extremely, extremely sick. And my mom asked me, "Did you have a good time?" And I was like, "Yeah, I had a great time, Don't call him, but yes, I had a great time." And when I think about that, it was just such an exciting thing. It was going to be such a beautiful thing, and so many girls in high school look forward to it. And it was really like a chore for me. All I wanted to do was get trashed. That's all I thought about all night long. And I never really drank just to have one or two drinks. Like that was never really a part of what I did. If I drank with intent. And if I blacked out, I was really okay with that because I knew I didn't want to remember the night before anyway. So if I blacked out, it was a good night for me. It was always a good night if I blacked out. And that's just how I drank. Alcohol at this point was causing some unmanageability in my life. I didn't really see alcohol as my master at this point. When I was 17 years old, I had been in trouble many more times at school for skipping school. I'd been caught skipping school again. I remember I came to one morning after a party out in the woods beside someone on the tailgate of a truck, and the ambulance had pulled up, and they were dying from alcohol poisoning. So, those were the kinds of positions that I placed myself in on a pretty regular basis. So by the time I was 17 years old, I was pretty much flunking out of school. I had double Fs in most of my classes because I wasn't showing up for them. My band teacher was covering for me when I would come to band about 30 minutes late, trashed, because he knew that he needed me to be on the field. So he'd hold the band up. My mom and dad were always getting phone calls from other people about the trouble that I was causing. And I remember that I walked out of school at a fourth period, which was band, because I had to show up for band. I missed everything else, but I got to be there for band. And I was walking out of fourth period into the parking lot, and I saw the car that my mom and dad drive, and that's not a good sign, because typically my brother would take me home, or I'd hitch a ride from somebody else. And as I got closer to the vehicle, I saw my mom and my dad in the car. And then I got closer and I saw suitcases in the back of the car. And that's pretty terrifying. Mom and dad both worked, as I told you, and so they don't get home until 5:30 or 6 at night, and they're here at school. And so I knew it wasn't good news. They weren't there for my brother, they were there for me. So I got in the back seat. My mom didn't say anything to me, my dad didn't speak to me, and I just cried hysterically, because I knew that the gig was up for me. I was 17 years old, and the gig was up. So we proceeded to go to Moore Regional Hospital, where they informed me, apparently my mom had done some research, and they informed me that I'd be going to a treatment center for alcohol and drugs, an adolescent treatment center. So that's what happened. I was terrified. I wasn't, I was not really looking forward to it. That was not what I was wishing for at 17. Certainly not my hopes. And so they escorted me to Holly Hill Hospital. I was escorted by the police. I was 17, so I couldn't go into Moore Regional for detox. When I came out of there, I was introduced to a 6-month treatment facility in Aberdeen, North Carolina. And I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous, and that was on October 5th, 2005. And I remember going to my very first meeting. It was a Wednesday night at the West Side group, and I will never forget that meeting. I don't know what was said. I don't know any of that. All I know is that I cried through the entire meeting. I just cried. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't fight because I wasn't of legal age. I had to stay in that treatment center. And at the end of the meeting, one of the guys I was in treatment with like elbowed me when they were giving out these little plastic things. And he's like, get one of the white ones. And I was like, what? And he was like, get up and get a white chip. So I got up and got my first white chip. And that was my first introduction to AA. I went through that treatment center. I did a whole lot of paperwork and a whole lot of big book studies. I learned about Alcoholics Anonymous. I got a sponsor. And you know, intellectually, I could swallow the steps. I understood the powerlessness over alcohol, the unmanageability, and all of the steps on paper. And I don't know if it went any further than that. I had a beautiful experience when I was in that treatment center, though. And it was probably the first time in my life that I felt like maybe, just maybe, I fit in somewhere. They were all crazy like I was. So it was like, maybe, just maybe, I fit in here. From there, my mom and dad didn't want me home, so I was put into, or I voluntarily went into the Women's Halfway House in Southern Pines, and I spent another 7 months there. I did not stay sober through that event. The sponsor that I had while I was in treatment in the treatment facility decided to move to Arizona. Like, not just to Mecklenburg County or something, but to Arizona. And you know, I was crushed by that. I was like, who do you think you are? Don't you know who I am? You know, like, I need you in my life. And when she moved, I never got another sponsor. I continued to come to meetings, but I began to get restless, irritable, discontent all over again. I started to hate the world. The world had wronged me again. I hated all the women I was in the halfway house. I hated the fact I had to work. I had never worked a day in my life prior to going to this halfway house. Never. So I had to work. We had to pay rent. You know, I had responsibilities. I had to cook dinner. We had cereal often, but I had to cook. You know, and I had to do my own laundry. And this was like big girl stuff, man. So at any rate, you know, I you know, held out my stay there. I only had to stay there, or, you know, it's only recommended you stay there for 6 months. I could have stayed a year. In that entire process, like I said, I started to become resentful again, restless, irritable, and discontented again, and I broke the rules. I'll leave it at that. I'm not going to share it in mixed company, but I broke the rules in that halfway house, and I was kicked out immediately. Like, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, but kicked out. And when I was kicked out of that, this began a series of unfortunate events for me. I was like, all right, fine, I'm out of here, fine. You know, I was done. Mom and Dad did not want me home. I'm thankful to people in Alcoholics Anonymous who gave me a chance and allowed me to stay in their home. And I disrespected a lot of those homes and destroyed a lot of those homes when I stayed there because I couldn't stay sober. And I've had the opportunity to make amends for that, and I'm grateful. But at any rate, so I did not stay sober. The pain became too great for me. Sobriety just was unthinkable for me at that point, and so I began to drink. And in that time, I ended up, well, technically I was homeless as soon as I left the halfway house, but I ended up for real homeless shortly after that. I moved to Charlotte. Why? I'm really not sure. Sounded like a good idea at the time. While I was in Charlotte, I was living in homeless shelters. I was living on the street. I was living in laundromats because they stayed open 24/7. I was living in motel to motel to motel. Any motel I could stay in, I stayed as long as I could, promising that I would pay the next day, promising that money was coming the next day, and it never came, and eventually I was kicked out of those. This went on for about 3 or 4 months, and it was extremely cold. You know, it's like, can't be homeless in the summer because that might have been all right, but it was really cold. You know, it was very, very cold. And what I'm grateful for is that in that time, the only people that I called were women in Alcoholics Anonymous that I had met prior to drinking again. Women who have loved me and carried me on their shoulders. And I'm getting emotional because a lot of those women are here, but women who've loved me and carried me on their shoulders throughout this entire journey for me. Those are the people I kept in contact with. And I remember calling one of them, and I said, hey man, I've been up for about 4 days, and I got $6. What do I do? You know, like, what do you say to that? You know? And she was like, well, you could get a bus ticket and get you a warm coffee. And then there was like dead silence on the other end. Me, you know, I'm like, what? Coffee and a bus ticket. And so a couple seconds passed, and she said, or you could walk 4 doors down and get drunk. And I said, thanks, bye. And I hung up the phone, and that's what I did. I got drunk. And this went on for quite some time, like I said. Eventually, somehow, the grace of God entered into my life, and my mom and dad, I had called my mom and dad 7 different times and told them that I was ready to come home. It was like those windows of opportunity to get sober when the pain was so great, and I knew there was a solution in Alcoholics Anonymous. I had heard your stories. I knew that if you were sober and okay, that there was hope for me. So I'd have those little teeny tiny windows of opportunities throughout this period of time, to pick up the phone and get help and get back here. And I did that. Every time I felt that tremendous pain, I called my parents and I said, listen, I'm ready to come home. And they'd say, okay, where are you at? And I'd say, well, I'm at the corner of, whatever it was, or I'm at this homeless shelter. And they'd say, okay, we'll be there at 2:30. And I'd say, okay, great, that sounds great, Mom, that sounds great. And at about 2:15, the panic would set in. Panic and terror, sheer terror would come over me, because I knew that when they got there, the gig was really up for me, and I'd have to do the sobriety thing. And I'd tried it before, and the pain was so tremendous for me. Sobriety was absolutely excruciating for me. And I would leave. I'd start walking and I'd leave. My parents came to Charlotte 6 times and left without their daughter 6 different times. Came to get me. On the 7th time, like I said, God's grace was totally at work in that whole event, and I made it to my aunt's house, who lives in Charlotte, and my parents were there, and I was escorted there by a taxi. And that was the first time in my life. My mom and dad were standing on the corner, just anxiously waiting for their daughter. And when I got there, it was the first time that my dad had ever told me that he loved me, that I remember. And I'm sure that he told me when I was a teeny tiny little girl, but I knew that he meant it. And he grabbed me up in his arms and told me how much he loved me. And I'm telling you that, at that moment, I meant business, and I desperately wanted to stay sober. I had a shiny black eye. I had been in jail when I was in Charlotte, and let me just say, I pray to God I never have to go back, because I am not jail material, but I didn't do it well. But I had a shiny black eye. When my mom and dad saw me, I was very, very, very sick when my mom and dad got me back in their arms. And they put me in the car, and they called Paige immediately and said, we got her! And it was like, thank God. They had a map of Charlotte, and they pinpointed where I was every time I called. It was like a Where's Waldo book. And so anyway, they were really grateful, and I meant business. I desperately wanted to stay sober. I needed to stay sober bad. Alcohol had become my master by this point. I absolutely could not stop drinking once I started to drink, and if I wasn't drinking, it was all that I thought about. How I could steal it, how I could manipulate you. It's all that I thought about round the clock if I didn't have it. Or what I could do instead so that it would give me the same effect. So at any rate, like I said, I meant business. When I got back home, my parents tried to get me. No, they didn't. I'm lying. When I got back home, my mom and dad took me to an AA meeting every single night. I was here. I came in, I picked up a white chip, and I meant it with every fiber in my body. I meant it. I really, really wanted to stay sober. 2 weeks later, I was extremely drunk. I had gone out drinking, and for the first time ever, all that I wanted to do was drink a couple drinks just to knock the edge off, because I was in tremendous emotional pain. Sobriety was extremely difficult for me. So anyway, all I wanted was just to be okay, just for a minute. And I remember I went into a blackout almost immediately. I have no idea what happened. I have no idea how long I was out. All I know is that when I came to, my mom was standing in the doorway of an apartment, and I was on the living room floor in someone else's clothes, very, very sick. And I looked my mom in the eyes, and she looked at me, and I just cried. And it was the first time I think that I was conscious and aware that alcohol had become my master. And so my mom put me in the backseat of the car, and if she told you this story, she would tell you that she was so infuriated that she would have left me for dead on the side of the road. She was so infuriated. And I know that. I'm not putting words in her mouth because she told me that. But anyway, so she got me home, and they attempted to get me into a detox facility at Moore Regional Hospital. And my mom and dad, because I was an adult, they just dropped me off at the door. And I was very, very physically sick. I went in there and I asked to get into detox, and they gave me a whole lot of this and didn't move me anywhere. And so before long, I was throwing rocking chairs and cussing and screaming, threatening lives, and they threatened to call the police on me and have me escorted off the premises. So I left because I didn't want to do jail. So I left, and when I left, my dad works at the hospital. He works in shipping and receiving. So when I left, I was walking down the street, and my dad was smoking a cigarette. He was on break. He was driving around the hospital smoking, because you cannot smoke on the premises. And he saw me, and he stopped, and he picked me up, and he took me home. And after that, my parents took time off of work to stay home with me. My mom and dad pulled a mattress into their bed. They spoon-fed me on the mattress, took shifts off work, and kept me home and took me to a meeting every single night, regardless how sick I was. And I was very, very sick, very sick. And so I sat on the mattress in their room and could hardly hold my little head up, and my mom fed me soup, and that's how I detoxed. I didn't go back through treatment when I got sober this time. I just came to AA. And when I got here and I picked up what I pray is my last white chip, there was a woman. Of course, I was sitting way in the back. I didn't want anything to do with up front here. I was so humiliated that I was here again picking up another white chip. I can't even tell you how many white chips I had picked up. And every time I meant it. And I picked up what I pray is my last white chip, and I came up here, and I was in the back, and Chuck and some other members of this home group were back there talking to me after the meeting. And one woman who's like this tall, bright red hair, and just a ball of fire came back there. And as she was walking out the door, she stopped with her hand on her hip, and she said, "Kelly, you keep coming, because you'll either get sober or you'll die." And then she walked out the door, and I was like, what? But what I know, like, I didn't get any hugs and warm welcomes and glad you're here, I love you, blah, blah, blah. Like, they were serious. And what I know to be true is that is absolutely the truth for me. If I keep coming, either I'll get sober or I'll die. Period. Those are the only options for me. The only options. Because I tried successfully drinking, and I'm not equipped for that. Not equipped for it. So I knew at that moment that this was it, man. This is the last house on the block for me. I was done. Absolutely done. And when I was about 7 days sober, the pain had become so great again, and I was absolutely ready to blow my head off, because I knew if I drank, I'd end up dead anyway. But sobriety wasn't an option, and so I was really ready to blow my brains out when I was about a week sober. And I picked up the phone and called a guy that I knew I could get drunk with, the same guy that I got drunk with the last time I got drunk. And he didn't answer his phone, and I left him an extremely frantic message saying, "I need to get with you and do whatever you got right now." And about 5 minutes later, I had a moment of clarity after I hung up, and I knew that if he called me, I'd have to go, and if I went, I would probably die. And I got up and I unplugged the phone, and I went back into my room and was hysterical, because this was it. This was it. And I was thinking, if this is sobriety, count me out. That night, I experienced the presence of God, and that makes me emotional, because that night, I really didn't have a relationship with God. I didn't grow up going to church, and today I'm grateful for that, because when I came here, I didn't have any preconceived ideas about this higher power that all of you talked about. I didn't have any prejudices against it. And that night, I prayed genuinely for the first time in my life that God, please kill me. Please kill me. And then I asked for help, like I had never asked for help in my entire life, and the obsession to drink was relieved from me that night. I felt the warmth of something greater than me surround me, and I can't explain what happened, but I'm grateful that it happened. The next morning, I woke up and I painted flowers and peace signs on my walls, and I told my mom what had happened, and she thought that I had taken LSD, which I found hysterical. I'm like, what? But 2 weeks later, she actually came to me and she said, Kelly, I believe you. I know that something happened because I can see it in your eyes. And that's such a beautiful thing. And from there, my journey in Alcoholics Anonymous was really kicked off. I was coming to these meetings as much as I possibly could. I saw a woman that I knew had been sober a lot longer than me walking into a meeting one day, and I was sitting on a bench smoking, and I death gripped her before she came in, and I said, dude, you got to help me. Please, you have to help me. And that was to be my sponsor. And she took time out of her life, and she loved me, and she worked the steps with me. She took me through the steps out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I believe very strongly in that because it's what's worked for me. I sponsor the women that I sponsor today the same way, straight out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So we did that, and then there came a time in my sobriety when she said, Kelly, she was working a lot of hours, and it was really difficult for her to meet with me. So she suggested I got involved in a big book study or started one if there wasn't one here. And so we did that. Members from this home group did that on a Thursday night at 6:30, and it saved my life. I will never forget that. It was a beautiful experience. We all sat at that table, and we went through the big book from the very first page, and we read sentence by sentence, and broke it down paragraph by paragraph. And that is awesome. And my recovery really took off. I joined this home group. My home group decided I should be the secretary. I was like, whatever. And so I was doing the secretary. 2 years later, they decided I should be the GSR. And so I did that. And that is one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had. Chuck was like my little service sponsor. He was like, you going to assemblies with me? I was like, okay. And so we went. And I found a true love and joy in AA service. And that saved my life because it kept me involved in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm so grateful for that. And today I'm the treasurer for my home group. A little iffy sometimes, but I'm it. and I've also served within the district. And that's so cool. It's such an honor to serve in Alcoholics Anonymous and to give back on a whole nother level what's been given to me. I did meet my husband. I called him Mr. AA when I first got sober. I wanted nothing to do with him because he was in recovery, and I wanted nothing to do with that. So anyway, I met him, and I was like 39 days sober, and my sponsor called me, and she's like, listen, we're going to Akron, Ohio. And I was like, sure, whatever. What days do I need to take off from work? I love taking off work. And so she told me, and I was like, okay, cool, we can do this. And she said it was a big AA function, and, I had no idea what I was in for. And if you have not been to Founders Day, I highly recommend, if you ever get the opportunity, please take it, because it totally changed my life. So we were like, we left in the middle of the night so that we could drive all the way up to Ohio, and we could drive through the night. No traffic, whatever. So we get there, and me and my sponsor drove together, and we get there to where we were all meeting, and here's this guy getting out of the car, and I looked at my sponsor, and I'm like, what's the deal? Is he going? And she's like, yeah, he's going. And I was like, oh my God. So we, all three of us, sat in the back. My sponsor sat between us. Good for her. And and we all took a trip to Akron, Ohio. And we got up there, and we got to stay with some wonderful friends, and we had this beautiful experience. But what's so cool is that Richard and I talked the entire way up there and the entire way back. We became very good friends prior to a relationship ever beginning. And I had never done that, ever. I know nothing about that. So I had never done that. And my sponsor did not tell me not to get into a relationship. She told me that if I worked the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, nothing really mattered anyway. If I got into a relationship, whatever. She wasn't this, don't get into a relationship, you'll get drunk kind of person. It was a matter of working the steps. If I work the steps, then I can recover from alcoholism, whether I'm in a relationship or not. And I firmly believe that today. Don't encourage it with the women I sponsor. but it was a beautiful experience for me. When we were up in Founders Day, I got to go to Dr. Bob's home, and that's where I took my third step, upstairs in one of the bedrooms. I met incredibly wonderful people. They have a motorcade up there of like 3,000, 3,500 bikes. And from Bass, we don't know motorcycles, know nothing about them. So it was an incredible experience. And at 6:30 on Sunday morning, they have a motorcade that carries a wreath to Dr. Bob's gravesite. And at that gravesite, we all sing Amazing Grace together, and it's a beautiful experience. But prior to that, I had been invited to sit in the lead car that carries the wreath, and so we were waiting to get ready for this, and all these huge giant biker dudes and women were standing on the sidewalk, and they had their arms locked at 6:30 in the morning singing Lean on Me. And I was standing there totally baffled by this, and I had a bright pink shirt on and bleach blonde hair and shoes I'd gotten from the homeless shelter 2 sizes too big, and they waved like this for me to come over and to lock arms with them. And so that morning we all sang Lean on Me, and at that moment I knew for the first time in my life that I belonged. No matter where I came from, no matter how old I am, how young I am, whether we had money, whether we didn't, none of that mattered at that moment. What mattered is that we were members of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm grateful for a sponsor who didn't talk to me about being too young or that she spilled more than I drank kind of stuff. Because had that have happened, I don't know if I'd be sober today. Hopefully I would. What I know today is that alcoholic is about what happens to me when I put booze into my body. Something incredible happens to me and I cannot stop. I have an allergy to it. And if I'm not drinking, it's all that I can think about round the clock. And if that happens to you, like it happens to me, then I believe we've earned a seat in Alcoholics Anonymous and we deserve to be here. And every one of us have a chance to recover. And if you don't have a sponsor, I suggest that you get one. I thank God for mine. Off my soapbox. 4 years later, after this event in Akron, Ohio, Richard got down on one knee at the place that we had our very first kiss and proposed. And I was like, me? And it was this beautiful experience. And I will never forget that day. And we had a beautiful, beautiful sober wedding, May 14th, 2011. A beautiful sober wedding. Many of you were there, and we had an awesome time. And ever since then, we've just lived a beautiful life. I continue to carry the message to women that I sponsor, and I try to carry a message of hope and not a message full of mess. And I hope that I've done that tonight for all of you. Thank you.